good while ago now, I started a series where I looked at the Sonic games that came out for various handheld game systems. We looked at the titles available for Sega's Game Gear, the Game Boy Advance, the DS, and even the 3DS. Now, my plan was to put them all together in one big handheld Sonic games episode compilation, but there was one problem. There were more games I hadn't covered across various handheld systems, most of which were one-offs and couldn't fill an entire episode individually. So I realized the only solution was to track down the remaining ones, regardless of how obscure, regardless of the hardware I needed to buy, or hoops I needed to jump through to emulate, and finally tie up these loose ends. So today, let's talk about the remaining and often obscure Sonic games strewn across various different handheld platforms, most of which you probably don't own.
Okay, so let's set a few ground rules so this doesn't get completely out of hand. As usual, I'm going to cover these games in order of release, but I'm only going to cover games for dedicated gaming hardware. That means hardware designed specifically for video games. That means no mobile games, although there's technically one exception to this rule, and if you already know what it is, I'm sure you already understand why. No old school Java games, of which there's a bunch. Maybe for another video someday, but these videos are for Sonic games on gaming handhelds. Also, no party games. These have to be games that take place solely in the universe of the Sonic franchise, so no crossovers. And lastly, this is just for games exclusive to handhelds, no ports of console games. I'm looking at you, PS Vita. I know an exception to this was made for the first episode I did on Game Gear Sonic games, since a lot of those games were also released for the Sega Master System, but that's a rare occurrence due to the fact that the Game Gear is essentially a portable Master System. Okay, so without further ado, let's take a look at these. Unfortunately, first up on this list is probably one of the worst video games I've ever played in my entire life. It's called Sonic Jam, but despite the name, it really is nothing like its console counterpart. It was released for the infamous and short-lived Gamecom, a handheld by Tiger Electronics, who are most known for the little LCD handhelds they used to produce. But whereas those were very simple toys, each based on one specific thing respectively, the Gamecom was an actual system, if you could call it that could play multiple different games. As you could probably imagine, this was not the easiest thing to be able to play, so let me just tell you now, if you have any interest in checking this game out, and you don't intend to track down an actual physical Gamecom and a copy of the game just for collection purposes, just stop and turn back now. Getting this to run on my PC was a nightmare, and the amount of hoops I had to jump through just to get this pile of crap to boot was insane. It took me multiple hours, a ton of trial and error, 3 different ways of launching MAME, and a nice migraine to finally get this thing up and running. And that's because there's no standalone emulator that exists for the Gamecom. Big surprise. Apparently at one point there was one, but it came out back in like 2011, and as far as I know, it doesn't work, at least not anymore. Because of the lack of a proper dedicated emulator, you need to run it via MAME, but that's easier said than done, and by the end I was ripping my hair out. And that's before even needing to play this hunk of shit. But alas, I digress. Sonic Jam, on the surface, looks like a handheld collection of Sonic 2, 3, and Knuckles, as the main menu suggests, but this is a fallacy. Instead, it's a bastardized chimera of those 3. Each quote-unquote game is actually a 4-act zone, each based on the first stage of each respective game. Sonic 2 is based on Emerald Hill, Sonic 3 is based on Angel Island Zone, and Sonic & Knuckles is based on Mushroom Hill. It has this weird structure where the first act is a normal goal-clear stage, but then the subsequent 3 zones each have a boss, all from each respective game, but paying no mind to each original game's boss order. I need to stop saying each. Now, as for how this thing plays, I can't even really begin to describe how bad this actually feels. Momentum makes absolutely no sense. The game runs at about 2 frames a second, like literally I'm not even exaggerating at all. Hitboxes make no sense, collision is often broken, the music are all these horrible renditions of random Sonic tracks, and they all seem to have wrong dissonant notes all over the place within them. The amount of screen crunch here is some of the worst I've ever seen, and to top it all off, the timer runs super fast for no reason, so it's extremely easy to time out in this game, and this isn't at all helped by the fact that some of the stages are quite literally labyrinthian. Now, you have the option to play as Sonic, Tails, or Knuckles, but I'm gonna just tell you right now, there's absolutely zero reason to play as anyone other than Tails. Sonic has no abilities at all. Knuckles is also stripped of his gliding and climbing abilities and is basically just a sprite swap of Sonic, but for whatever reason, Tails still retains his flight ability. I want to say this breaks the game, but the game is already so unfair and infuriating to the point where it borders on unplayable that, honestly, selecting Tails just makes this game not bearable, but at the very least possible to complete without save states. I genuinely have no idea how anyone beats this game playing as Sonic or Knuckles. Also, at one point, I stumbled upon a special stage ring, and I'm entirely convinced they're impossible to beat. And my assumption was further supported when I tried to find info about what happens when you beat the special stages, and not even Sonic Retro had information on what happens when you beat them, only that they exist in the first place. Anyway, this is one of the worst things I've ever played in my life. Wow! Hey, real quick, if you like what you're seeing, consider subscribing. I know you hear this constantly, but it really does make a huge difference, and your boy's currently fighting for his life trying to push through the algorithm here. That's all I gotta say. So if you do like the video, just know that subscribing goes way farther in supporting me than you probably realize. Now back to the video. There was many a time when I was little that I would be walking around a Toys R Us or any other retail store that sold games, and among the displays for all much more popular systems, I would see the section where Neo Geo Pocket stuff was sold. I never really had any idea what it was, especially when the Neo Geo Pocket Color came out, and I was like, what is this and why is it trying to rip off the Game Boy Color? I was like, this isn't Nintendo or Sega, what is this? If only stupid 8-year-old me who played Sonic 2 religiously had any idea what this little handheld was home to. 2 decades later, and I'm just now playing Sonic Pocket Adventure for the first time.
Can you imagine if we had these when we were 12?
Even better, we got them when we're 40.
I wish I had known sooner just how good this is. Now, of course, I don't want to oversell this, let's be realistic, because at its core, much like any of the other Sonic handheld games from back then, it's not as tight and responsive as its console counterparts. So I will add that the disclaimer of everything I'm gonna say is that this is still a handheld Sonic game from the 90s, and it does feel like one. That being said, this game is so goddamn cool. One might say it is way past cool. Most of you probably know by now that my favorite video game of all time is Sonic 2, so it's no surprise that I like this game as much as I do. What Pocket Adventure basically is this weird amalgamation of various classic Sonic elements, but whereas the last game was a fever dream, Sonic Pocket Adventure is actually pretty good. The stages are mostly all based on Sonic 2, save for the final stage, which is sort of a mashup from what I can tell, and most of the music is taken directly from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. It doesn't always fit, especially when you enter a stage that, despite its name, looks identical to a zone from Sonic 2, only to hear a random track from Sonic 3, but it's actually really cool to hear official stripped-down renditions of Sonic 3 music. I'd specify that it's 16-bit, but so is the Genesis, so there'd be no technical distinction, but I will say it leans far more into the sound of an 8-bit chiptune as opposed to the Genesis iconic sound. And I mean, visually it looks like an 8-bit game too, so like I said, the stages are all mostly based on stages from Sonic 2, but with, for whatever reason, completely different zone names. And it's not even like they only base the level assets on Sonic 2's, because while these stages are redesigned and not the same, they do share some memorable Sonic 2 locales that anyone who knows that game front to back will recognize. The Eggman boss fights are all different too. Some are brand new, but the bulk are loosely based on Sonic 2 Eggman fights, but with a totally different spin on all of them that changes up the fights entirely. I actually find these bosses to be more challenging than in Sonic 2, and while that is in part due to having less tight controls, it more so is just the fact that these bosses take a little more thought and attention to beat and can't really be spammed like in Sonic 2. Sonic Pocket Adventure pulls some other elements from Sonic 3 as well besides just the music. Knuckles shows up literally out of nowhere, and then you have to face off against him like in Sonic 3 before the final fight with Eggman, which itself is very reminiscent of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, save for the fact that, for whatever reason, the final fight is literally the easiest one in the game and actually can be cheesed a little. Or at least that would be the final fight, if not for the existence of the Chaos Emeralds, which can be obtained roughly the same way as in Sonic 2, using exactly the same type of special stages. But instead of having special stages be accessed via checkpoints, they went the Sonic 1 route and added giant rings at the goalposts that appear, shockingly, if you make it to the end of the stage with 50 rings. Now, this is kind of a huge glaring problem, because in Sonic 1, you had 2 chances to not only make the ring appear, but beat the special stage, since Sonic 1 typically has 3 acts per stage. and the special stages were easier. Sonic 2, while difficult in its special stages, gave you the option to try them a bunch of times per stage with the plentiful amount of checkpoints that you could access them from. Like in Sonic 2, if you're good enough, you can literally get Supersonic while you're still in Emerald Hill Zone. Unfortunately, in Sonic Pocket Adventure, you only get one chance at an emerald per stage, and they start to get pretty difficult because of what they're based on. And each zone only houses one specific emerald, so each emerald in the game you need to get first try on every single stage, or else you can't get them all. Now, I'm not sure about going back and stage selecting afterwards, but for a straight run-through or first-time playthrough, getting all the emeralds is an extremely unforgiving task to accomplish. All that being said, spoiler, I didn't get them all, and I wasn't about to go back and bust my ass to do it. What happens is, once you collect the initial 6 Chaos Emeralds via the special stages, in the final Eggman fight, you need to aim for the emerald powering his machine instead of attacking him. Doing so will have Sonic collect the final emerald, and instead of the game ending there, you get a final boss fight, which is obviously heavily inspired by Sonic 3 and Knuckles. What all this means, though, is getting all the emeralds is extremely difficult and doesn't give you access to Super Sonic in normal play. Kinda disappointing, but still kinda cool that this final boss fight exists. Now, apparently, it is possible to play as Tails, but once again, not under normal circumstances. The game has a link feature, and apparently if you link up on real hardware and play with someone else, the player too gets to play as Tails. I think it's kind of weird that his gameplay was implemented and he has an entire sprite sheet, but it is completely absent from the game if playing alone. Like, I don't know why they went out of their way to put him in the game, but then you can't play as him unless you are under extremely specific circumstances. Anyway, after you beat the game, there's some other stuff you can do as well, including time trials and even these puzzles that you put together from pieces that you find in the base game's various stages. If you complete 3 of them, you unlock a sound test mode, and if you can manage to complete all 6, you unlock a special stage option as well. Sonic Pocket Adventure is probably the most fun I've had with a handheld Sonic game, at least in terms of the 8 or 16-bit ones. There's a few hiccups here and there, but overall, this was pretty fun and polished, and any fan of the classic games will have a good time with this one. Some of you may have to get over the green eyes, though. This next one, there really isn't too much to say about it, so I'll try just briefly going over it. Back in the early 2000s, gaming on your cell phone wasn't really a thing. Sure, most phones had simple games like Snake or something, but back then, cell phones weren't really used for gaming. They were primarily used for making phone calls. Even texting was done via the T9 method with a normal phone keypad, if you have any idea what that is or remember that. Times were tough. Well, in 2003, Nokia, famously known for making phones that were seemingly indestructible, came out with a cell phone that was a hybrid of a phone and a gaming handheld. Now, like I said in the beginning, I said I wasn't going to cover mobile games in this video, but I think this still qualifies as it was created to be both a cell phone and a dedicated gaming handheld. One of the N-Gage's launch titles was called Sonic N. And the reason I mentioned that there wasn't much to say about it is because it's literally just a port of Sonic Advance 1. I guess since Sonic Advance was named after the Game Boy Advance, they decided to change the name to reflect the N-Gage, despite the fact that the game is, for the most part, the same. The only areas where the game differs from the GBA release is that they just kinda made it worse. It's Sonic Advance with a much more narrow viewing window due to the N-Gage's screen being oriented in portrait, omission of the tiny Chow Garden, and some tracks in the sound test are also absent. Not to mention, it also runs slower than the GBA version. The game can be played in a letterboxed 4:3 aspect ratio, but at the expense of reduced graphical fidelity and a much smaller screen, which can't even be toggled until you enter a stage. There really is no winning here. It's cool that the N-Gage got a port of Sonic Advance, especially if this was your only means of playing it, but saying this port isn't the ideal way to play Sonic Advance would be an extreme understatement. Though to be fair, I'd really love to meet the people who passed up the Game Boy Advance in 2001 only to buy the Game Taco 2 years later. Back in 2003, the children's edutainment company Leapfrog put out a handheld system called the Leapster. A couple years after its launch, a learning game based on the Sonic X show came out. It's a simple game where you play as Sonic and pretty much just have to walk around answering a bunch of baby math. Let me tell you a quick little story about having to get footage for this. Out of the few different versions of the Leapster that were released, only this one called the LMAX version is capable of composite video out. So I had to go out of my way to track one of these down, and after receiving it, it took a little trial and error, but I managed to get it to work. Unfortunately, the footage I captured is interlaced and bounces up and down every frame. I tried to fix it, and I did manage to get it to work for short clips, but when I tried to actually apply it to all of my footage, I sat around for an hour waiting for it to apply, and then this happened. It's okay. I I didn't need those 65 minutes anyway. Fortunately, at the very last second, I thought to cut the 60 FPS footage down to 30, and that seemed to fix it. You're welcome. Now, as for the game, there isn't really one. Is it technically a game? Yeah, sure. Is it really? Not really. See, there's definitely a couple different ways to go about making an edutainment game, especially one based on a pre-existing property. Either you make a fun game that's actually engaging to play and sprinkle in different learning mechanics naturally, thereby making an actual enjoyable experience, like many of the Learning Company games from back in the day, or you can just make a bare-bones pop quiz with a Sonic the Hedgehog coat of paint. This would be the latter. You basically just walk around the various stages and these giant robots block your path. You answer math problems by selecting the correct numbers, and then you can pass. Every so often, you're forcibly transported into a minigame where you need to answer more math problems, and once beaten, you're transported back to the stage.
It's Eggman's Super Sucky Machine!
How many rings are there?
Despite using Sonic 3 sprites for whatever reason, even though this is based on Sonic X, there's no actual Sonic mechanics here other than being able to jump. There's no spin dash, no attacking at all since there are no real enemies in the game, and you do not run fast at all. As it turns out, Sonic X for the Leapster is actually a reskin of a previous Leapster game called Numbers on the Run Counting on Zero, and now this makes a whole lot more sense. This game was even then reskinned again into a Go Diego Go game. Probably the biggest difference here is that they made these animated cutscenes based on Sonic X that are, well, they sure do exist.
I'm Chris, a great friend of Sonic the Hedgehog. I'd love to introduce you to him.
Someone call my name? Hey, my friends! You're going down, Eggman!
Now, there's 3 main areas with 3 stages per area. Think of it as 3 zones with 3 acts each. Unfortunately, though, there really isn't much that differs between each act. No real increased challenge outside of the game introducing subtraction in the final zone, but because there are no enemies or physics to speak of, the slight variation in level layout doesn't really change anything worth noting. It kind of just feels like you have to play through the same stage 3 times. At the end of each zone, you save one of Sonic's friends that have been captured by Eggman, but once you beat the 3rd zone, you just go back to the level map. According to the cutting room floor, there's actually a cut credit sequence, which is kind of odd that it wasn't included. Also, thanks to the cutting room floor, I found out about the hidden cheat menu. So if you start a new file and type in the name .sonster, you unlock a few different cheat options. You can activate a fly/no clip mode that lets you move Sonic around the stage, kind of like debug mode from the classic Sonic games. Only problem was that I couldn't get it to deactivate, so it was kind of pointless. Also unlockable is a level select menu, which not only gives you access to a test level, but also shows further evidence of this game being built off Counting on Zero, as the level select menu and level names all still reflect the original game. Not to mention, one of the mini-games from Counting on Zero that I guess was cut is still accessible, but unfortunately trying to actually play it was crashing the game for me. According to the cutting room floor, you can also play as Zero, the player character from Counting on Zero, but I couldn't manage to figure out how to do that. This was all definitely interesting, but I shouldn't need to tell you that you can probably go ahead and pass on this one. When the Sony PSP was current, I didn't really know too much about it. I was never a PlayStation guy back then, so it wasn't really in the cards for me to ever get one. I didn't even really know many people who owned one, and I sure as hell never knew about the Sonic games that were released for it, at least not until I was an adult. In 2006, quite the year for Sonic, Sonic Rivals was released for the PSP, and it's honestly a really weird entry in the series. Typically, when you think of an on-foot Sonic racing game, Sonic R usually comes to mind, but they actually took another crack at it with the Rivals series. Unlike Sonic R, though, Sonic Rivals is a 2.5D racing/platforming game. It's kind of hard to describe. It's not fully a racing game, and it's not fully a platformer. There's 4 characters you can choose from at the start, with one more being unlockable after you've beaten the game with all 4, but I won't be doing that today. And there's slightly different stories for each character. From what I grasp, it's kind of like Sonic Adventure, where the game basically covers perspectives of each character and you get more insight and story info as you complete the game with each respective character. I could be wrong, but that's what I've gotten from it. Because I don't have that kind of time, I only played as Sonic, and I won't be going in depth about the story. But the premise, at least from Sonic's perspective, Eggman has a camera which can turn anyone into cards. I don't know why the camera turns people into cards and not just, photographs. but that's what we're working with here. The main objective is basically just to defeat Eggman and save the characters that have been transformed into cards. However, that's easier said than done because for the most part, it isn't Eggman you're up against. Each character is after Eggman for their own reasons, and despite all having basically the same goal, they're all at each other's throats trying to be the first one to do it, hence the name of the series. Sounds a lot to me like this plot only exists so that the hero characters have a reason to all be against each other for this one. The normal stages are set up very much like how you'd imagine a hybrid of a Sonic stage and a racing game to be. For the most part, you just hold right and react to your surroundings accordingly. There are boost, power-ups to get the edge on your opponent, little platforming challenges thrown in, and the occasional quick-time button press, which, if failed, can usually go one of two ways. Either you miss out on a power-up or a quicker route, or you straight up fall off the course and lose a bunch of time. Speaking of, the rubber banding in this game is insane. For anyone who isn't aware of what that is, long story short, it's where the game will snap the AI opponent closer to you if you get too far ahead of it. So in this game, it really doesn't matter how good you get, because the better you do, the worse the rubber banding is. For the most part, most of the stages are these races against any of the other characters, but most zones also have boss fights at the end, where, once again, the goal isn't to defeat the boss, but to beat the boss before your rival does. This was actually one of the more enjoyable parts of the game, not that that's really saying much, but I'll get to that. Actually, my favorite part of the game is at the end, where you're no longer racing an opponent, but racing against the clock. I'm not sure what it is, but for whatever reason, I find it way less stressful to beat out a clock rather than an AI opponent. In like any game where I've ever had to do this. I guess it also helps that I can't be pelted with items the entire time I'm trying to run. So like, in concept, this game doesn't sound too bad. In execution though, not so much. Look, I don't think this is a horrible game with no redeeming qualities, but it also isn't a game I'll look back on fondly and want to play again. It's just too clunky. The controls are super loose feeling, and overall the game is just messy. Getting hit and losing time is super frustrating, and the platforming sections, while I get what they were going for, just kind of feel like a pain and bring the pace of the game to a halt. It's a racing game where sometimes you need to randomly stop and platform slowly and precisely with controls that are anything but precise. This game isn't terrible. It's fine, I guess, but it's not something I'd ever call a must-play. Well, they wasted no time, and a year later, Sonic Rivals 2 was released. Now, this game is, for the most part, the same, with a few notable changes. Now, visually, the game looks great, with a lot of good color usage and flashy set pieces, and this time around, you have a choice of 8 different characters split up into 4 teams. You have Sonic and Tails, Shadow and Metal, Knuckles and Rouge, and Espio and Silver. Once again, each party has their own storyline, so again, I won't be going too in-depth into the story, and to be honest, I didn't even pay too much attention for the campaign I did finish, which was Sonic and Tails. Eggman kidnaps a bunch of Chow or something, and this big monster called Ifrit is on the brink of being awoken, and now Sonic and Tails need to stop Eggman and defeat Ifrit before it unalives everyone or something. Now, unlike the previous game, there's actually a notable difference between characters. Each character has an ability that can be used after you fill up your special meter, which is filled by collecting rings. Sonic can dash, Tails can fly, Shadow has chaos control, etc. And each one can give you an edge on your opponent during a race. Some powers are more useful than others, though, like Tails' flight, for example, was mostly useless in comparison to Sonic's dash, so whenever I had to play as Tails, I didn't really use it too much. Now, the boss battles in this game are similar to Rivals 1, only the bosses are way, way cheaper. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. The bosses themselves aren't super cheap. The AI of your opponent who is trying to beat you at taking them down is extremely unfair. These controls were not meant for precise platforming in combat and are super loose and imprecise. The AI, though, has complete, perfect control and can stop on a dime if it needs to. The AI can just straight up do things that you can't and reacts way quicker than you could ever hope to. A lot of these boss fights are getting a hit in during the small window you're able to, and the AI is literally ready at the exact millisecond the attack window opens, and more often than not, immediately reacts to it before you even have a chance. It's all doable, it's just extremely frustrating more often than not. Especially this one boss fight, for example, where you need to attack these flying enemies so they fall and collide with the boss as it goes by. You have to time it precisely during a very quick window, which for you is pretty difficult, but the AI can react to it with perfect timing. And it doesn't help that there's these weird rules that are applied to just this boss. See, normally, the homing attack works against seemingly every other enemy in the game, including your opponent. Except this one. Every time you use the homing attack on them, you get hurt, while your opponent has no problem attacking them at all. Turns out, they're for some reason immune to the homing attack and hurt you if you try to use it. Instead, you need to use your super slow, floaty, clunky jump to attack them, which only makes the timing even harder. Why? New to Sonic Rivals 2 are these combat stages. Basically, each zone has 4 acts. One race, one fight against another character, another race using the other character in your team, and then another boss fight. These combat acts are pretty cheap as well, but as long as you're aggressive, they aren't usually too bad. Usually. The game gives you these giant arenas to fight in, but honestly, the more time you spend keeping your distance, the more of a chance your opponent has to grab offensive items and use them on you. The best strategy I've found is literally just closing the gap and being as aggressive as possible to take them out as fast as you can. Anyway, that's basically it. There's some other stuff like multiplayer modes, but I couldn't try any of that out. Rivals 2 is marginally better than Rivals 1, but that's not really saying too much. The music is better, though it still has random music and sound effects from the first game which were reused, and it's actually quite a bit jarring to hear random old songs from the first game in the context of the new soundtrack. Like, it's fine, it's just really weird because they're totally different styles. This is another one you can skip over too, honestly. If you're a die-hard Sonic fan and want to try these out, I'd say go for it, but you really aren't missing anything if you pass on the Rival series. In 2008, Leapfrog came out with yet another handheld gaming device called the Dig, and with it came another Sonic-themed edutainment game, this time just called Sonic the Hedgehog. Unfortunately for me, the Dig never released a model that could do video output, so I had to film less than ideal footage of it. Initially, I put the console on a stand so I could hold it steady while my camera was on a tripod, but the stand broke. Apparently, there's a way to mod these things to do composite, but it's very involved and requires solder work to be done to the main CPU, and I'm not trying to do all that. So I had to go with this shoddy camera recording of a shaky screen, is what I would say if a kind soul didn't reach out to me and offer me capture footage of the game, which surprisingly has not already been properly captured and uploaded on YouTube. Definitely sucks that I already sat there filming the stupid screen, but now we have actual footage, so hooray! Sonic the Hedgehog for the Dig is a spelling game designed for kids 7 to 10. Apparently, you could hook the system up to a computer and download a database of 10,000 words, but once again, not going out of my way to do all that, and plus, I doubt that feature even works now anyway. Let me just be frank with what this game is. It's this weird Frankenstein's monster of elements from Sonic 1, 2, and 3, and the stages are extremely confusing in how they're structured. The first stage says Green Hill Zone, right? But aesthetically, it's actually Emerald Hill Zone and uses Emerald Hill's assets. Then stage 2 is Emerald Hill Zone? There are no acts, so each level is a new zone, with the exception of the first two, who for some reason use all the same level assets. Okay. Also featured are Sandopolis, Hydro City, Scrap Brain, Chemical Plant, and Egg Base Zone, which is really just Death Egg Zone. For whatever reason, each stage sometimes features music from other stages and sometimes they don't. It's kind of a crapshoot. For example, Sandopolis' music plays during Sandopolis, but it also plays during Hydro City. And Green Hill Zone, which is actually Emerald Hill Zone, plays Mushroom Hill Zone from Sonic & Knuckles, despite not even being in the game. Literally none of this makes sense at all. The levels are mostly completely redesigned. There's a couple locales that I recognize here and there, but for the most part, it's all new. I might as well get this out of the way and explain the spelling part of this. Basically, in each stage, there's any number of what look to be special stage rings. Sometimes they block your path entirely, and some need to be sought out intentionally. What they really are, though, are these extremely simple spelling minigames. There's a couple that aren't too bad, but there's one that's extremely frustrating where you need to jump on these monitors with the correct letters to spell a word. And the reason this is the frustrating one is because of the controls and hitboxes, which make it annoyingly difficult to actually break the monitors, but I'll talk about that a little more in a second. The other two are just these simple complete the word games and don't take much actual dexterity to complete and only really challenge your spelling knowledge. My main problem with this, though, is just the fact that it doesn't really teach you anything. It's like studying with flashcards without actually teaching the player how to spell in the first place. There's no way this game taught any kid how to spell and only really serves as a pop quiz for something kids have already learned in school. Now, as for the actual platforming gameplay, it surprisingly has more actual video game in here than I expected. Now don't get me wrong, none of this is good. The hitboxes are so tiny, while Sonic's hurtbox is large, so a lot of the times you'll lose your rings in some pretty cheap ways. The physics are all sorts of f***ed up. Sonic controls very erratically in, like, the weirdest way, too. Like, tapping forward makes you go from standing to full speed way too quickly, but also Sonic's top speed is extremely slow. So it's too slow to be a proper Sonic run speed, but too fast to be precise when you need it to be. Bottomless pits are absent, even in areas where they're supposed to be. Luckily, despite the jank, you can still cheese bosses, which was shocking to me because the bosses are the only thing in this game I can seem to chain bounces off of. There's also some weird programming stuff going on sometimes, like how I guess all springs react when you use one. Despite all this, though, I was surprised that it leaned more into being an actual Sonic game where you need to run through stages and defeat bosses with platforming video game mechanics. Like, I'd assume a game like this would just make you spell words to defeat Eggman or something, but nope. It's all terrible, but at the very least, it's actually a video game and not just a spelling test with Sonic the Hedgehog's face slapped on it. The last stage also surprisingly was just a Death Egg robot fight from Sonic 2, only, well... If I'm being quite honest, this was for the most part, well, a giant heap of garbage. I mean, if I'm being as fair as humanly possible, the Rival series isn't completely terrible. I mean, it's playable, it isn't broken, and I'm sure you can find some fun in it, but it's also janky and nothing to really write home about. Save for Sonic Pocket Adventure, most of these are better left unplayed. I had to jump through a lot of hoops to be able to cover these, and it's probably for good reason. Sonic Pocket Adventure, though, that's a must-play, I think. I knew going into this that it was one of the better ones, but honestly, it's better than most of any of the other handheld Sonic games, and as we've now seen, I've played literally all of them. Honestly, I think I liked it more than even something as polished as the Sonic Advance series. It's just so simple and straightforward, and it just works. But then again, I'm also Sonic 2 biased. Well, that's it. I've finally covered what I hope is all the main handheld Sonic games. If you've been along for the ride the entire time, I can't thank you enough for watching, and if this is the first one you've seen, or even the first video of mine you've seen, maybe go back and check out the other ones, which I assume maybe you'd want to if you stuck around till this far into the video. I've played a whole lot of Sonic games over the years, and if there's one thing I've learned, it's that Sonic doesn't always get it right, and to be fair, saying that is a pretty big understatement. But when he does get it right, boy does he nail it. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it and want to see more, there's a couple other videos right there you can check out. And if you want to see everything I upload, subscribe and then tap the bell icon. And if you want to help support the channel, I also have a Patreon right there too.